online report done by Kevin and his now partners in another venture called Popmark, a diversification company. Kevin with Lisa Horan, and the other guy's name?
Steve Joseph Antonelli.
So thank you, Kevin, for coming, and I'll let him take it from here.
All right, welcome. How's everybody doing so far today? Good? Yeah, all right. Welcome. Very excited to be here. Want to thank Tom and the mix staff for having me. I'm excited to hear what these guys have to say, as I'm sure you all are as well. But before I get started, and I'm actually going to let these guys, actually let's go ahead and do that first. Let's do introductions first. Can you guys each maybe give us a quick description about what you do on a daily basis? Maybe a few people you've worked with. 30-second elevator speech. Go ahead. Who wants to start? Bob, you want to?
I'll start at this end. Okay. I'm Bob Volick, and I oh gosh, 30 seconds.
All right,
yeah, how about an hour? I'm a freelance producer engineer. I've worked in Nashville for 25 years. Prior to that, I was in Los Angeles. I have my own home mixing room now. I also track and overdub at commercial studios. I'm also an educator. I teach recording and mixing classes, and I'm glad to be here today.
All right.
My name is Pat McMakin. I'm the Director of Operations for Ocean Way Nashville Studios. I've been an engineer and producer for 30 years in Nashville. I have done some artist development work for Sony ATV during that period and run numerous studios.
My name is Logan, and I've been here for about 19 years, freelance recording mix engineer. I've got my own studio as well. I usually start out in places like Pat's studio, start there and finish up at my place, but I've currently been working with Toby Keith and Luke Bryan, and glad to be here today.
I'm Tony Morra. I'm a session musician in town. I've been here for 14 years. From New York City originally, and I also have a home studio. Now, all engineers don't start throwing tomatoes and things at me. But what I started was tracking drums in my home, reluctantly, and it has grown into what I pretty much do almost half or more than half my time now. And I do a lot of my work in town and over the internet. A big portion of it is over the internet, and it's become a very viable way for me to make some money and work with artists that maybe would not have been able to. In the recent past, Selena Gomez had a hit called Tell Me Something I Don't Know. That was part of a movie. I cut the drums for that at my house. It was the title track for the movie. Also, I do a lot of video game tracking at home. Work with Kip Winger from Winger, Paul Taylor, various producers in town and producers back in New York and L.A. Worked on tracks with Steve Lukather and Steve Vai through the net. So that's sort of what I do, and I think why I'm here.
And we are going to talk about the internet and working over the internet, because that's a pretty important topic, I think, that has to do a lot with this discussion. So, but before we get started, I kind of want to level the playing field here for you guys in the audience, and kind of get a show of hands as to who here is either an engineer, producer in a home studio environment, whether it's your own or you work with friends' studios, things like that. Can you guys raise your hand for all the home studio? And when I say home, we mean anything from small to medium, large. Okay. And then what about those of you engineers, producers alike that are doing commercial, that have either that run a commercial studio or? Okay. All right. Thank you. So we've got a lot of home studio people here, which is good. Good. First thing I'd like to talk about, guys, is that home studios cover such a broad range of setups these days. In the last 10 years with DAWs, everything's gone digital, cost, affordability. I guess what I'd like to get is so that everybody in the studio understands what a home studio means in the context of this discussion. Can I have each one of you describe your home studio, if you have one? In this case, I think just the two of you.
Well,
Well, you as well, yes. And the idea of what that could be for you, just to get a baseline so they understand, since we kind of know who they are, let's kind of hear it from you guys. And maybe Pat, you can.
I can talk about
you can speak into that. Yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so my studio is in my home, and it's a converted garage. It's a 25 by 25 two-car garage, a little like 2.5-car garage that I had converted into a studio. And when we bought the house, the garage had a 9 by 22 very narrow room that was a utility room that, of course, as a musician, I saw like, oh my gosh, I could load my drums directly from where they are, no steps. My wife was glad because I didn't have to put my drums to practice in the house. So that was a very good thing. So it started out as that little utility room was just my practice room. I had no plans. Part of my history is that growing up in New York and going through my career, I got very heavily into the MIDI stuff when the drum machine thing came out. That's how old I am. I was alive when MIDI didn't exist. So being involved in electronics got me very involved in the studios, jingle world, and I actually worked at some jingle houses where you would do everything. You'd answer the phone, clean the bathroom, write the jingle, play on it. It was one of those things. So I got to engineer there. And because I was pretty good with some numbers, I actually got to be the studio manager and pay the bills. And that was when I decided I would never own my own studio, because there was never a plus, it was always a minus. So I had no intention of having a studio until we got here, and a few producer and programmer friends of mine in Nashville said, wow, if you threw a few mics on your drum kit and got a Mackie mixer and a computer, boy, you could do all our demos. Because that was a point in time here, about 8 years ago, when people were getting away from more the boy band programmy sound, and Avril Lavigne and Hilary Duff hit, and everybody wanted live drums on pop stuff. And then it was always the country thing, but that pretty much stayed in its realm where it was always done with everybody tracking. But this whole pop idea and doing stuff at home, and I did a considerable amount of Christian contemporary music. So that's how I started. I had a Mackie board and a computer, and it was just in the 9 by 10 room. That was the drum room, and it wasn't, well, I have to, I just going to do some demos for some guys. The outpouring of people once I would do something for somebody was pretty unbelievable, how it just started to I had no idea that it would turn into what it would turn into. Well, maybe I did. That's why I kept warning my wife, nope, this is going to be a money pit. And now and then what happened was I just put the drums in the garage one day, and they seemed to work there. And I actually built a platform at one time so I could have the drums on wheels and roll it over so my wife could still pull her car in. And I would move them back and then roll them until eventually it wasn't just programmers and some friends in the industry. It started being writers, co-writers, publishing people, and it was industry people coming into my garage. So I said, I think I got to kind of get it a little together, being very into how the studio looked. And I hired a gentleman in town named Dennis Kurtula, who had built a few producers that I had worked for. He built their rooms for them. So he came in and he said, well, the key to your room is it's a garage. So my floor sloped. So the ceiling and the floor weren't perpendicular. It's about a 9-foot ceiling. It's kind of weird. It's 9 feet. And then he just, he fixed all the other walls. And then the wall that's across from the drums, he built like a angled pattern. And the thing that's hysterical is that I was a little concerned that the room would be less vibrant. Turned out that it's actually, I have more of a room sound now because he did it properly. So on my front, as a guy doing drums at home, right now the amount of gear I've amassed over 8 years, I could probably sell it and buy a house with it, as we all know. So my room is sort of like, I think, what some guys are doing at home in smaller spaces, and gear-wise kind of having what a lot of studios might have. So that's my space. So it's a home studio, but it's really, I've put a lot of gear money into it and a lot of thought into it so that it, will, because I'm doing masters for folks. So I said, if people are going to call me for masters, I want to be able to give them masters. I'm not trying to snow anybody, So And I just got lucky that this stupid garage just sounds good for drums. So that's about so now it's a 25 by 25 space and the 9 by 22 control room.
Great, thanks, Tony. Mills, you want
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? My place is kind of similar to that. I started out in just a den, about a 25 by 16 den with a regular crawl space. You know, technically it's probably all wrong. But I spent the first couple years in there just kind of getting it, you know, set up to where, you know, sitting up out in the middle of the room so the speakers aren't up against the wall. That's kind of a no-no. And I plastered 703 wherever there was a flat spot. I went down to Breeding's Insulation and bought $300 or $400 worth of 703 and put it up everywhere. It looked horrible. The wife says, "God, you got to cover that stuff up." So I learned how to cover it up. But you know, for the first year or so, it was kind of a big experiment. And you know, most of my work is mixing. I mix almost, you know, probably 60-70% of the time. And so once I got the speaker set up in the right place in the room, got the 703, I thought, you know what, this sounds pretty good in here. And as long as I'm close to my speakers, you know, I've got, you know, like the perfect little triangle, you know, 3-4 feet away from my head. As long as I keep my head in that area, it sounds fantastic. It's not like East RSA or Ocean Way, where anywhere in the room it sounds the same. I can't do that. I can't afford to do that. I don't want to spend the money to do that. Hence, we got to make money. But in the middle, it sounds great. And then a few years ago, I took the old garage, I think, which seems to be pretty much the mode, and finished that out for a little overdub space. I don't want to record drums there because for me, it's too hard. You know, I mean, he's got a great setup and he knows how to hear drums in his place. But for me, I wanted to be able to still go to Pat's place or Blackbird and work in those studios because I really enjoy that vibe as long as we can afford to keep doing it. And but I finished out my garage for, you know, like a vocal overdub space, guitar overdubs. You know, I got it isolated enough to where I can sit in the control room, turn the speakers up, and I don't hear the guitars out there in the other room. And that's worked really, really good. And I've been doing that way for about 3 years, I guess, but mixing in the house for about almost 10 years now. So that's worked enormously good. And also by mixing in the house allows me to spend an incredible amount of time on the mix. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not. But most of the time I can dig myself out of the hole if I get in one and not have to worry about the clock. So it's kind of been a blessing for me to be able to mix at home. And but I guess the most important thing for me was to get it to where, because every decision that you make, whether you're at a $2,500 a day studio or in your home studio, every decision you make comes through those speakers. So make it so that you can hear really, really well in there. And you don't have to, I mean, some guys hire expensive guys. I was scared to hire someone like Michael Cronin, who I love his rooms, or Tom Hidley, because I'd spend all this money and then go, what if I don't like it? You know, because there's a lot of studios in town I don't like the way they sound. I go in there and I can't hear. But then there's several that sound fantastic, and I'm like, I can't afford that, you know. So that's what I've got, and it's been working really, really good for me. And I had several #1s and a few million-selling records mixed out of there. So I guess it's working. I'll keep doing it.
Either one?
Ocean Way is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. Our A room is roughly 75 by 50 foot room with 30-foot ceilings. We can fit 80 pieces of orchestra in there. It's a monster drum room. The console's a Neve 8078, 80 inputs with an additional 64 returns, so we can return 144 channels of very high quality audio. Lots of good outboard equipment. But I think the thing is, you can shop around Nashville and find a lot of great commercial studios that are actually still in business. I think when I look on this panel, I don't think it's the room that Mills built or the garage that Tony built or the control room that Bob built. I think what we have to keep in mind is the talent. It's the people. It's their capabilities. And I've learned certainly with Ocean Way that without talented folks in there, it's just a big old building. So wherever you record, I think that's the thing to really keep in mind is the talent and the work ethic and the job that you do is really the key thing. But I don't want to really sort of digress too much about what we have, except for to say that I think there's a place for both environments. I'm an engineer and producer as well, and understand how nice, what a nice luxury it is to be able to be quote unquote off the clock and to be able to leave a mix up and go fishing for a few hours and come back in and listen to it and come back in the next morning and check it before you print it. So I think that's certainly one thing that a home studio has to offer. The commercial side, I would say that the huge benefit is that stuff works. There's a lot of stuff. Our mic collection is incredible. So again, I think it's a matter of picking the right environment for the right job. I think I would get a consensus if I said, especially Tony, you know, as musicians, I think when musicians have the money, have the budget to come in and work collaboratively in the same room together, they enjoy that Absolutely. A whole lot more than working in a private situation. So I really think what we're doing here is we're looking at a couple things. One is a lower cost of entry. Gives everybody a chance to kind of get in and get their feet wet, but we're really responding to the economic times that we're in. So to say that recording in one environment or the other is an ideal, I think it's driven more by budget than it is by the creative choice. Because honestly, as an engineer, I'd rather be in a commercial facility if money were no object.
Absolutely.
You know, because I can say, well, yeah, I mean, I can choose from dozens of mics. I can choose from lots of options, and it really turns the creative process into something that's really a whole lot of fun, and it's a wide palette to paint off of. So again, I have a great deal of respect for all these guys and for all. I mean, I've worked in some great private studios, and again, love that environment. But would say that if money were no object, I would pick a commercial studio every time.
Oh yeah. Well, I know we need to do some other questions here, so I'll try to be brief. But I come from a little different view on this. I don't really want to have a studio, so I don't have a tracking or overdub environment. I also have to say, even though I acknowledge that there's a lot of different ways to work, and a lot of it is definitely budget driven, that my personal desire to have flexibilities and to record different projects in different rooms for different drum sounds, different equipment that's available, prohibits me from really caring to do that at my home. I do mix and edit at home. I set up a mixing environment because that's what I felt that I could do properly. So it's kind of my own personal desire of what I choose and what I want. I had Carl Tatt's design come in, and that was the first thing that I did, is I got a monitoring environment that I felt was really accurate, and basically took the dining room of my house and took the chandelier out, put in some track lighting, and then it was a studio or a control room basically, and then I had Carl Tatt's design do a monitoring system that I'm very, very pleased with. And then I felt I only had to equip it with back-end stuff, mixing equipment, which it changes all the time. That's the other thing too. I think it's really hard to stay current with your home studio because can you generate enough income to offset the fact that every couple of years just about everything you own is obsolete. So for me, I really, I do all my tracking at other studios, and if I really feel I need the drum sound that's going to be at, the church at Ocean Way, then that's where we're going to do the drums. If I feel that at, Quad Studios or Omni or Starstruck or Blackbird is where I, can get the vibe and the sound, then I like that flexibility. So that's where I come from. On occasion, I've done a few direct overdubs and things in my home studio, and even that, I've really felt like I didn't have the headphone system and the other things that I sort of desire that I have at these other places. So,
that's great. Still comes down to talent and ears as well.
Yeah, what you want.
Well, sticking with the topic of talent and collaborating. My next question is going to be pretty straightforward, but I want to preface it with this. With the advent and increase of home studios over the last 5-10 years across the board, how can we make that environment a viable relationship between the home and commercial studio spaces across the country to ensure that the quality of the studio and the work that comes out of the studio and passion and integrity and all that kind of stuff don't get compromised. So my question to you guys each is, what's the link? In your opinion, what's the link? Because I think that's a big question with production in general. I mean, I'd like to kind of get a sense of what you guys each think that, and that's going to take us in, I mean, to move forward from that, we're going to talk about things that you can do in home studio environments, private studios, can and can't do, as well as commercial studios. So give me your...
Can I,
Yeah,
mind if I jump in?
Go ahead. Please do.
That's of particular interest to me because we do see a lot of stuff come in from a variety of places at Ocean Way and at every commercial studio I've been involved with. And the link, the best link, is the Recording Academy website. The Producers and Engineer Wing section of that website has several documents you can download. One is deliverables. What constitutes a deliverable? The other is sort of a best practices. How do you want your files to look when they leave your place? That was done by the Nashville chapter. The Miami chapter did a real good one on Pro Tools protocol, so that or workstation protocol. One of the things I bet you everybody in the room has gotten is somebody will bring their tracks in to do overdubs or mix, and it's labeled track 1, track 2, track 3.
Audio 1,
so,
audio 2.
So when you say you can't afford the big studio,
That's
one of the things I would say is, well, you just wasted about 2 hours right there, because now we got to go through and identify and name all the tracks. So little things like naming tracks and consolidating regions and thinning files and that sort of thing. And again, the Producers and Engineer Wing guidelines really sort of, it's very, it's intense, involved reading. It can put you right to sleep. But there's great information in there, and it was put together by a really good group of leading engineer, producers, and record label folks. So it's really a good best practices. I think that's the single best resource that I know of.
Yeah.
And to digress a little bit, one of the things that we do see a lot of is, since fewer and fewer people are coming up in a studio environment as they learn, I know you did, and I know you did, and I did.
But coming straight from a small studio, you buy kind of piece your gear together over the years.
Well, yeah, but we all came through a we had a series of practices that were just done industry-wide. Protocol.
Yeah.
We tracked bass on track 1 because of the 2-inch tape. There was a little bit. So when our Pro Tools sessions show up, Bob's are going to look similar to mine, are going to look similar to Mills, and we're going to look at each other's work and know right where to jump in and start. Whereas when we get stuff from folks that haven't had that training or education, and I'm going to underline the word education, we get things that are pretty scattered, and it takes us a good while to sort them out.
Yeah. There's, if I can jump in, it just made me think that, I really talk about this a lot. There's also a necessity to, have your projects archived in such a way, which is exactly, part of what you're talking about with the narrowest guidelines, so that in the future, if you have the opportunity, you put something out there that you have the opportunity to repurpose it for some future format, like we see a lot of old classic albums, today being remixed in 5.1 and everything. That's, really only possible because of the organization of the producers and engineers, of that past era. That you pull out a 2-inch tape box, and all the tracks are labeled. Everything is stored in such a way that it can be pulled off a shelf 20 years later and worked with again. So that's one of the things when you're moving projects around studios in the country. It's very important that you're doing some housekeeping while you're being creative. When I get projects, I have this on my website too, because I generally only mix it at home. I ask the client, producer, artist, whoever, engineers, whoever's sending me files, to send them in a certain format so that I can just open them up. I use Nuendo as my base. I have a Pro Tools system as well, but if someone's sending me files that are from Logic or from Pro Tools, since I mix from Nuendo, I have to go through and a lot of times fix edits and crossfades and all that, so I ask them to send me consolidated files. That helps in 2 ways. One is it makes it quicker for me to get started in a mix and import those files into whatever system I'm using, but it's also provided a consolidation of these tracks, not just being audio 1 through 100, but bass, kick, snare, electric guitar 1, solo, and all that. And then that's easier to start archiving for the future, because hopefully what we're doing here is creating some things that people are going to want to hear, years from now, and so that's really important that we think about that while we're doing it. Okay.
When you were talking about standard, I mean, that's, 10 years and back, there was standards for recording
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
and organizing everything as you worked through the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
I think with digital, it's become a little more scattered, and so maybe these are things like you're doing, putting, you don't want anybody to send you something unless they actually have followed your guidelines, and if more people were to do that, if more engineers, producers, mixers were to do that, that might help clear up some of this gray area working between home and private studios and commercial studios as well, and spend more time on the creative part, and you don't have to go through all that stuff,
Well, for just to add that one thing, while we're working, we work in a number of different ways. I'm talking about that's part of the process of finishing your project and storing it, is at some point you need to have it consolidated down to something that you could open up hopefully 10 years or 20 years from now. So, okay, anybody else want to grab that?
Well, based off just what you guys have been talking about, Capitol Records, not that I'm plugging for them or anything, but they, when I turn a record into them, it's a full day of making everything exactly the way they want it. And I think they've guaranteed that, you pretty much are guarding against that, obsolescence of a computer, whether it be Pro Tools or Nuendo, flat files, broadcast wave, all 88.2, et cetera, et cetera. And the list is huge, and it takes me all day, and they're glad to pay for it. But, so much of the time, like not too long ago, I got a session from a commercial studio, and it wasn't in Nashville, and I opened it up, and there was about 10 songs throughout the edit window, and probably 20, 25 tracks. And nothing was labeled, nothing was even, there was a few markers that didn't make any sense, that were even the wrong song title, and I had to spend at least a half an hour looking for the song that I had to mix. And I finally found it. I'm like, well, I guess this is it. This one sounds the best, and it sounded pretty awful.
That goes in your mix time.
Yeah, and there was stuff that was on that clearly was not supposed to be in the mix. It was like either out of sync, and I'm like, it's not hard to, when you open up Pro Tools, if you press play, like when I leave a session, if it's going to go to someone else, the first thing I do is I just, everything that's visible in the edit window or mix window is what you need to hear. And just a little rough mix, doesn't have to be anything elaborate. And, if there's any tracks that aren't being used, turn them off and hide them and deactivate them. It's that's not that hard to do. Yep. And you can do that in any format, not just Pro Tools, but, and just label them, even if it's just a bass, just bass guitar or EGT for electric, whatever, just something that's obvious. But it's amazing what I get, and I literally spend sometimes the better part of a morning sorting out what I've got.
It's the analogy to me that comes to mind is how much would you charge to polish my car? And the answer is, well, it depends on whether it's assembled when I get it.
Right. Yeah. If the doors,
we got to put the parts together before we can polish.
But I just do that as I go. I don't spend, like, I've had some producers say, okay, we're going to spend a day now cleaning up all our fades. I'm like, look, I've done this so long, and for so, repetitiveness is what's made me fast in Pro Tools. I just do it as I go, clean up as I go, without wasting too much time, that is. Stuff that's not being used, lead vocal with a star or with a big M or whatever, master vocal, use that as your vocal track or whatever. But, like, sometimes I'll open, like this morning, before I came here, I was getting a mix set up, and there's a bunch of vocal tracks. I'm like, well, they're all turned down but one. Well, I guess that's my master vocal. Hopefully.
Yeah, you're hoping.
But it's all just says vocal, so it's just kind of work as you go, and you'll be surprised at how efficient you can get and how much easier it'll be for the guy behind you, whether you're going from a big studio to a small or back and forth, it's really important, because I've seen guys overdub to the wrong stuff. Wrong playlist. It was playlist 4. Well, playlist 8 was what was visible, so, make it so when you press play, that's what you're supposed to hear.
When you do 8 tracks of harmonies to the wrong vocal, that's a problem.
Done it.
And that makes me think that even in the days where certainly it was easier to be organized with, say, like a 24-track 2-inch tape, generally we had to make decisions because you just didn't have extra tracks to have 5 bass passes. You had to at some point pick, consolidate a bass and then make a choice and use those tracks, reuse them. But there are tapes out there that might have the master vocal with a star and say master, and another 2 vocals that are still on there that say take 1, take 2, do not use. So it's no different. I mean, if I pulled a tape from 20 years ago that I had to remix and it was 3 vocal tracks, it wouldn't help me much if they all 3 just said vocal. But if one says master and the other 2 say do not use, then I know, and that's exactly what Mills is talking about. You can do that very easily with any workstation. It's just a matter of labeling things properly. So.
And even the session icon. I mean, I've opened up folders before.
Which is the actual session
Yeah.
that you need to open.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Different dates, to label
Yeah.
differently. Yeah.
So you have to, when you're moving around for different people to work and going to different studios, it's really, really a time saver to be organized as you're going, right? So.
Tony, did you want to comment at all? Anytime.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, because a lot of the time with what I do, I mean, just to backtrack, I do work in Ocean Way and all those rooms, and they are great. And I just want to preface that my room is not to put any of those rooms out of work. If someone calls and says, hey, we can come record at your house or we can record at Ocean Way, I'm like, okay, I'll have my car. Just got to bring the stuff to Ocean Way. Yeah, my wife makes her very happy, too, when I do that, too. The house is very quiet. But when I do sessions where there are times when a producer might have a room in a studio, like there's one guy had a room in Soundstage. So basically what happened is I would do the drum tracks at my place for him and then send them to him. And again, luckily I worked, in the early days of, knowing how to align a tape machine. I was on a session actually, and these, I don't want to say young kids, I don't want to offend anybody, but they were like, man, it's not working. And I was like, did anybody align the tape machine? And they hadn't done it, so I did it. So it's knowing your history and how things have to go. I mean, I think that's absolutely you have to know how to do that if you're going to work in a position of mine, being a smaller studio, then taking a step up to the next place where they might be bringing guys in individually to overdub with, and making sure things are set up correctly, and how you're going to set and how you do the drums, kick, external kick, snare, bottom hat, toms. Do they want, I try to give them everything individually. Some guys just want the toms down to just 2 tracks, so I definitely do all that. But so I understand all of that, but because I've had enough guys yell at me over the years. So, but one of the things that I think on a totally maybe different topic is if you take the whole mentality of the commercial studio and a home studio is mindset. That's got to be one of the things that has to be the link, because I do deal with a lot of people who are like, come on. I have one engineer, I don't know if he's still here, but he always says, yeah, Tony, we're going to come record at your place, and I'll bring the rake home with me when I'm done, because he kind of makes a joke that it's my garage. But part of it is the mindset of that things, maybe, there are things now, to say that there are things that lack from an Ocean Way room in my room would be ridiculous, and it wouldn't be true, because there are so many pluses. But when I think for budgetary reasons, sometimes I think some people are really forced to. I've actually what happens to me a lot is, going back to your point about a player. Someone might have gone to Ocean Way with a band, and we have to use the band guy. We got to use the band guy. And after they try to edit one song for 6 hours, and they realize, wow, the hi-hat and the snare are so far away from each other, we can't. Beat Detective is saying stop. So guys, their budget is gone. So what they'll do is they'll send me the tracks, and then I'll kind of ghost the tracks at home and redo them. And the one thing I feel that I try to do is I've tried to not disrespect the system with what I'm doing. I don't have like the cheap brand name with the cheap computer and hey, I have a studio. I mean, I really went out, and I mean, because I do sessions, I'm lucky enough that I'm lucky enough that especially in Nashville, the engineers are great. That you could sit there and ask them questions, and they will tell you things. And they'll say, this is better gear for that, this is the best kind of mic pre for the snare. So I think the mindset of being a home studio guy, working with people in conjunction with commercial studios, saying, okay, yeah, how are you cutting a guitar? Well, I went to Radio Shack, and they told me this mic is just as good as any mic, And, so not just for drums, for other instruments, to know what you're doing. Like for me, there's a guy in town, his name is Steve Mark Antonio, and I got to give him props because he's a Goomba from New York. So when I met him, I had to do it or we'd get mad. Steve gets mad really quick. So, but he came in and he dials in my room for me. He's a good buddy, and he will dial in the drum sounds and make it work. And I've picked his brain, and he really has helped me out a lot. And I think if there's anyone here who does that, who's an engineer and plays, to really learn the craft of engineering to understand what it's about, rather than, yeah, I'm just going to buy some cheap mic and stick it in front of this cheap amp and play. There's a lot more to it. One, it'll make you more of a successful home recording musician. One of the pluses that I've had is that, thankfully, mix guys have gotten the drums and said, where'd you cut the drums? And it's at my house, and then I have to explain how I do everything. Because, like, how'd you make the ambience happen? How'd you do this happen? But I think it's because of the respect and the amount of money I've invested into my home place. But I think it's also mindset from the guy who wants to just work at a commercial studio, or the guy who's at home. You got to step it up. You can't just, if it's home, yeah, it's nice and comfy, but you got to step it up. You know, how are you going to compete? You know, because I know mix guys who have said, look, where'd you cut the guitars? Don't you, I can't, you're going to have to recut the stuff. Or it's taken me twice as long to do this mix because the guitars are horrible. So in turn, the producer's never going to hire that guy. Proficient, yes, but maybe he just doesn't have his home thing down. So it's really, it's all those things, but it's really mindset. You really have to, I think, respect that, okay, I'm here, I'm at Blackbird, and I'm in my house, not to just say, well, I could just get by. You have to approach it the same way, make sure the miking is correct. Move the drums around. I try to move the drums around to make them sound a little different. But for anybody else, it's mindset of how you're doing it.
Thank you. Can we, before we get on to Q&A, I want to do one last quick thing with you guys, and that's for each one of you to give just a sort of a quick success story of a project that you can think of where part of it was tracked maybe in a smaller studio, a project studio, private studio, and also, but where there's a combination or a blending of the two worlds, and what's a factor that made that successful. And it could be from a creative standpoint, it could be from a sonic standpoint, file transfer, whatever the case may be, but an example of something that sort of sticks out where you've kind of combined the best of both worlds, and what made that work.
I got one.
Yeah,
real
go.
Quick. The opposite way. I was hired to produce a record for an independent band, and they kind of told me the guys they had wanted to use. And I was like, okay, but that's 6 people, and this is a garage, you know, and I'm a big guy, so that doesn't leave a lot of room for a lot of people. So I said at this, I said, look, at this point, it's again mindset and knowing your capabilities. I took the project. And I went to, and it was last minute that they decided, because we were going to just do drums and overdub. They wanted to do everything live, everybody in the room together, which was awesome for the project. There's nothing better than that, especially as a drummer, because half the stuff I do in my room, when I hear the stuff back, it's like, I wish I was playing with the guitar player, because I would have done this, or I wouldn't have done that, so it would have opened up for that. Playing with the people, there's nothing better than that. So I did this project, and I went to Platinum Labs here, Platinum Labs, right? And I went there, cut the drums, great, got a lot of the rhythm sections, got the whole band basically done. Took it back to my place, and then did keyboard overdubs. I had some string players come over and do the whole thing, and hired an engineer, even though it's my home studio and I'm a musician. I'm not. You know what I mean? Strings, you hire a musician. If there's anyone out there who does what I do, when it's out of your realm, hire these guys, because that's what they do, you know? So, and it was one of the top independent projects. It spent #1 on the indie charts for like 6 weeks, and it was just, and now they're signed and they're moving on. So it was an incredible, for me, that was sort of a really nice meld of, and having to take me out of the equation as the drummer and go to another studio as the producer and say, okay, I need to make it work for me and for everybody, make it work the right way. So that was and then we shared files back and forth, and my guitar player was on the road, and he had a great rig, and he had a room, and he would do his stuff on the road, send me the files for some of the overdubs and for acoustic, and it worked out great.
Great, thank you. Who wants to go next?
Go ahead.
I guess my big success story, it was a kind of an epiphany for me, is I was doing a record for Matthew West, a contemporary Christian artist a few years ago. I did his first, I guess, 3 records, and I was the guy on the first one. It was an independent record. It wasn't a full-on label deal, so I did the whole thing, and it came out pretty good. I guess it was 98, somewhere around there. And then when you got a record deal with Universal South, they hired me just to overdub, because I was still kind of getting my mix feet, and I wasn't quite consistent enough. So, they hired other guys to track, and then I did most of the overdubs. And I think David Leonard who I have great respect for and has become a very good friend of mine through all this, mixed the whole record and it sounded great. So fast forward to record 2, and I thought, man, I really would like to do the whole thing. You know, they let me start tracking a little bit of the record, so I got to track a good part of the record. Overdubs, gosh, it went on forever. And they said, okay, can you do some roughs, you know, of X number of songs or this one song? So I thought, man, I'm going to make these roughs sound as good as I can. And because I was mixing it, working at home, at that point, I'd take, you know, we work in another studio, at the producer studio. I'd take the session home, and I would just work on it for hours and make it. Like, man, I got to make this sound good. I really want to mix this stuff. It's so much fun. And I literally would spend 3-4 hours on a single rough and do as many as I could within the time available, turn those in, and they're like, man, those roughs sound pretty good, you know. So anyway, so they hire the mix guy, and he does 2 or 3 songs, and I get a call back a few weeks later, and they're like, well, you know, it sounds good, but something about your rough. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I've been trying to do, man. I know I can do it. And I would listen to these other engineers' mixes and just really listen, and like, what is it that people are doing? What is it that these guys are doing? I can do this. I know I can do this, you know. And because I was working at home, I had the available time to try to maybe, quote, beat the mix, you know, or polish the rough up a little bit more so that they would use it. And that was, you know, from that point on, that's when things kind of turned around for me, that I could start mixing, because just, you know, listen to the guys that you like, you know, listen to whether it's Justin Niebank or David Leonard. They're all tremendous mixers. They have so much to offer, and if you just listen to them, and of course David became a good friend of mine, so I started asking him questions. And a few years ago, he said, I'm not going to tell you any more stuff because you take all of it and use it too well, you know. But those guys, you know, I'll talk to people all day long about what I do, because in fact, I talk so long that they usually walk away. You know, they're like, okay, thanks, I've heard enough, you know. But, you know, I guess that was my big point where I just really got excited that some roughs made it on the record, and just kind of tweak them up and save everything you do, by the way. Yeah. Save everything, date it and save it, you know.
But you're paying attention to what's going on, you know, you know, who you guys want to...
I can do a real quick one. I mean, we sort of see this daily. Anytime I see Mills in our A room tracking, I know it's going to go to his house to be mixed, and Mills does a lot of very successful records. So to name them all would be a little few. But one that was kind of exciting that wasn't Mills is there's a contemporary Christian artist named Chris Tomlin. And I think this is Chris's 3rd record. His first 2 had done really well, and they had all been done in their entirety at the producer's home studio. And they had an opportunity to come up from Texas and use Ocean Way for their 3rd one. And it was neat to see that epiphany for them of being able to actually be in the room at the same time and cut together after having made their records the other way.
Doing overdubs.
Yeah, and they were just overjoyed. It's like they couldn't believe what a wonderful experience it was. So that was kind of a neat thing. And then, of course, that went back to the producer studio and was mixed, and it did real well for Chris.
Yeah. But they tried it, but he had to wait till he got to a point where he could. And
he not only did he love it, he came back within the year and did a live Christmas record, live in the studio. And we do that. We've been doing these periodically, where the whole band comes in, sets up, we mic them, we record them, but they have a live audience as well.
Oh wow!
And that's kind of a unique experience, because they get the best of the studio with a little bit of the live thing too.
Yeah, real quick, Bob, go.
Yeah, I'll try to make this fast. You know, to me, it's really just. Yeah, it's about vibe. It's whatever seems to work for the artist. I don't really have any one project or artist to discuss, but I agree with Mills. I've done some projects before where I wanted to mix and I was hired to track, so I did as really a good job, as good a job as I could mixing, and has landed me the mixing gig from doing that, just from roughs. But that's just your desire to work and show someone what you can do. But the vibe part of it is big to me. If I, and that's where the home studio and the commercial studio does all work really well together. If I'm working with an artist, say a vocalist, that's going to be more comfortable working in someone's home because it's relaxed and they don't feel intimidated, then that's the better place to do it, right? I can get a great microphone and a preamp. But then it can go the other way too. I can work with an artist that if I'm able to bring them over to, to Blackbird or Ocean Way or something to do their vocals, then they feel like they're really important and they're going to get better performances. So see, there's no rules on this, and it's the same thing with whether a singer is going to do better to record with a band. You have to make those decisions as a producer, or maybe a singer is going to do better to be in your living room, just real intimate. The same thing goes for mixing. And I'd have to say the one reason I don't mind mixing at my home studio is it's all compromised to me, where maybe I sometimes wish I could mix on an 80-channel Neve desk. Then the other part of the mixing at home, which we've kind of addressed here too, is that I can also stop and start in my home studio when I want.
Spend a little more time.
Yeah, and spend a little time.
finessing
And so that's worth something to me. So I think they all work very well together. I just think it's individually what works for you and your projects. So.
Great, thank you all.
Okay.
Open the floor up to questions. You got like about, what, 10 minutes?
You'd step up here? Step up to the mic, please.
Hi, guys. My name is Denny. Thanks for coming down tonight. And it's inspirational to hear that combination of stories between the technical excellence and just stumbling your way through like we all do. Me personally, I'm a low-tech guy. I've always had problems. I'm a Mac guy. I had problems with Pro Tools. It was just always like a math class I could never get through. And then I saw an ad for Logic, and I just kind of I understand this. Boom. Is the contemporary Logic for Mac stuff, are the pros as knowledgeable, and can they do the same things with it they can do with Pro Tools, or is it still sort of like a little step brother to?
Who wants to?
What I see is I see a lot of Pro Tools because, again, they had about a dozen years leap.
I
And
agree.
so those folks that are working usually aren't going to take the time to learn another platform. If you know Pro Tools and Nuendo, you're even ahead of the game with just that. I don't see a lot of Logic in the Pro.
Well, that's funny you bring that up because I've thought about, because I've bought Pro Tools 8 times, and $80,000 later. And I complain, but I also love it because it's made me a living since 1991. I mean, I actually bought my first rig in 97, but I've been using it since it came out, in recording school, and it was called Sound Tool. So I complain about it, but I love it too. But, I talked to Nathan Chapman, who just lives down the street from me, and we work a little bit together. He has Logic, and I think it's a Logic 9 now, or whatever this version.
Yeah.
And he said it's smoking. He goes, if you're used to Pro Tools editing, it sucks. He goes, but everything else it does as good as Pro Tools. It's different. The Germans, that started Logic, it's different, man. It's a lot different than Pro Tools. But he doesn't use it exclusively, but he goes back and forth between Logic and Pro Tools. And he told me, he goes, man, you got to come here and check it out and try to mix it. It sounds fantastic. It's not better. It's just different. And because Logic, it's not proprietary so much. It costs a fraction of what Pro Tools costs. So if I was going to switch a format today, which I don't think I'll do, but if I was going to switch, that's probably what I would go to.
Wow.
Because I've heard some good press about it.
Can I throw in something on that? I would have to say, just from a lot of friends that work in different systems. I work with Pro Tools a lot and Nuendo a lot. Not so much with Logic, but I have a lot of very qualified friends that do. I think I could do the same work with any of those Pro systems. It's kind of, to me, they're all very good. It's not a case of one is really great and one's bad. It's more of a case of what are you used to and what can you get around.
And any
with
software is
most.
going to have a learning curve.
Yeah,
You just have to take the time and devote the time to learn it, so you can be creative with it and make the best out of it.
I'm probably a little bit, more capable using my Nuendo system than I am Pro Tools, but I'm really comfortable with both, and I've mixed projects in both, and I've been satisfied with the outcome. So it's still just tools.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
And I
thanks.
promise to clean up all my stuff if I bring it into you.
File or organization,
Yeah.
labeling.
Yeah.
I
Great,
think
thank
people
you.
should still use track sheets.
Yeah.
I just mix them out. That's
You know?
When somebody brings a project into you to mix, are they really ready to, two questions actually, are they really ready to, are they done with the tracking? Is there still that temptation, one more overdub, fly one more thing in, especially if you're working with consolidated files out of Pro Tools or something? Then the other thing is the expectations in terms of plugins, Melodyne, Antares, or people coming in from something needing a plugin that they had elsewhere and you just don't have it.
Print the plug-in. If you've got a specific effect from a plug-in that that's integral to the mix,
agree.
to the song, just print it. Because if you leave, I've got in fact this morning I opened up a session, and I think it had already been mixed by someone else, but there was probably 100 plugins in there, and some I have, some I don't. And I'm like, well, I press the space bar and listen, and it's just this mess because, you know, half the plugins aren't deactivated. But if you have a plugin, if Melodyne's doing an auto-tune type effect on the vocal, just lay it down and record it, and then deactivate it and hide the track. That way, if you need to get back to it and the mix engineer happens to have that plug in, then yes, that's great. But don't leave it on there assuming that they have it. Or if you've got like a super compressed piano or something, you know, unless it's one of the Digi's stock plugins that comes with every rig, you know, they may not get it. You know, so print the plug in.
I totally agree with that.
Thank you all very much for coming out today. Quick question. With the internet, I know we said we were going to talk a little bit about it. What are some of the ways you guys are seeing these files being transferred? Tony, yourself, are you bringing hard drives over? Some of the guys that are mixing, are you having...
Some people will bring a hard drive. I mean, you could get those thumb drives.
Yeah,
I mean, drum files are big, but some of these thumb file things are unbelievable how much you could get on them. For the internet, what I do is I have an FTP site, file transfer protocol site, where when I'm done with a session, I'll export my WAV files. Some guys, I just take the whole Pro Tools file. Like generally, I'll get an acoustic guitar click and programmed bass, or sometimes I get a whole rhythm section. What they want me to do is, if it's a Pro Tools session, I just save the Pro Tools session, clean it all up, take out if I Beat Detective did or any kind of, so it's just the files that are in the thing, so it's a small folder. Then what I do is I compress it, zip it, and then I'll upload it through an FTP protocol program. There's Fetch, Transmit, CyberDuck is free for Mac users. And what you do is you just compress it and you upload it there. And with my particular FTP, I have to send you the, you know, you'd have your folder on my thing, and then you go with your FTP transfer program. You go up there and you just download it. Then there's another one I've been using lately called MediaFire. That is really good. It's the same thing as like you send it. I'll just load it up there. I send a lot of 2 mixes with you send it. But that's how I'll, and some guys, what they'll do, and what I generally do, first of all, is when I'm done, I send them all that stuff, and then I burn everything to DVD and send it to them. So they have a hard copy of it, you know. Because I do get those calls 4 months later. Hey man, I've been tracking with the 2 mix and I'm ready for mixing. I can't find the files. So, you know, so I, you know, put it on DVDs. I keep a copy, but I send them. You know, I send those DVDs back and forth. Gotcha. But through the internet, it's really quick. I mean, through doing FTP or iDisk, which iDisk could be really slow. I would still use like a Transmit seems to work well with iDisk. You know, if you go through Transmit, it'll go into your iDisk, because iDisk will lock your computer, even how many versions later. But some people use that. And then there's the Digi. I get files from Digi Delivery. People have that.
Great. Send It Pro is good, though. You Send It Pro.
You Send It Pro.
It's like, I think I'm grandfathered in at $40 a year, which I feel fortunate. But
I use that a lot.
it's, you know, I typically just send, you know, like WAV file, 2 mixes up there. But I had to send a whole movie's worth of soundtrack stuff to LA last minute, so I sent 9 gigs over.
Oh my gosh.
And
over You Send It Pro?
Over You Send It Pro, and I just I set it up. You know, the folder zipped it automatically, and then it spent all night, and like 4 or 5 hours later, it made it as a miracle. I couldn't believe it. But you know, it works. I mean, I wouldn't
for all the hours it took to.
No. But I mean, I wouldn't recommend sending 7 gigs over You Send It Pro. But pay for it. Don't use the free one. The free one sucks.
But
the one, I think it's like $80 a year now, or maybe it's $100 a year. It's so great, and it's, you know, usually holds it for 14 days. I think you can make it stay longer if you wanted to, or and then like, is what I'll do when I leave town. If I'm at the end of a mix and someone's like a mastering guy's waiting, and I'm like, I want to get out of town for the weekend, I'll send it to myself if he doesn't get back to me. And then all I got to do from another laptop somewhere else, I can just forward it, and it doesn't have to re-upload. And I don't even have the file on my computer at that point. And it's, to me, that's the greatest thing. And it's got a little thing that goes in the dock of your Macintosh, and you just open that up, drag the file to it, type in the email, and hit send. And it's awesome.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question regarding home studios. I'm sure a lot of home studio owners are kind of like myself in that for any number of reasons we're not set up to do full live band performances and are subject to use things like Superior Drummer, Addictive Drums, and all the drum programs and do things, you know.
You go to the downtownbattery.com.
And, you know, do things, you know, one instrument at a time. So do you have any tips for trying to, as best as possible, recreate a live sounding environment under those circumstances? Because that's one thing I run into is, you know, having to do everything in the box. It often sounds like it's done in the box a little bit more than what I would like.
Give you one snare drum trick. If you know, and these are engineers I'm talking. I should be laughed out of the room. But having done MIDI for years too, one of the tricks we used to do, this is like a New York thing. You take the snare drum track, right? Put it on to get like a headphone. Bust it out into a headphone. If you can get a real snare drum, put the headphone top on this top of the snare, and then put a bottom mic on this for the snares. And then you could loosen up the snares, and that will give you the little, especially if there's a lot of ghost notes, you'll get that bottom snare sound in your snare drum. So that's always been kind of a fun thing to do. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It actually does work. I did that for years. Being a drummer who was able to do that when I programmed, it always made the snare sound a lot smoother. So that's one way to get a snare drum a little more live sounding.
Another trick I heard was just, you can always pipe stuff through a speaker in any room in your house and mic the room.
Garage. Yeah.
But I sense though that a lot of the thing that you're lacking is the lack of interactivity between musicians. I mean that's just so hard to replace.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a complete substitute. I mean, those are things to help a little bit.
But I mean, we're isolating stuff to such a great degree, and if you've got an amp with a mic right on it, it doesn't matter whether it's in my studio or your house.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, again, I think it's the interactivity.
Make sure your drums are in time.
Yeah, that's the
a
other
lot
thing.
of guys try to, they'll be at their house and they'll have some really loose drum track, and they're trying to get these guitars over to feel good, and the drummer's all over the place, and so if you've got your bass and drums down
It's
first,
that pesky talent thing again.
yeah. But just even send it to a guy if your drummer can't play it in time, if it's a young kid or a rock band and he's got a good vibe, send it to a guy, have it tightened up or tighten it up yourself, and at least get that stuff in time so that everybody else after that sounds somewhat in time, and that has a miracle effect on feel.
Mm-hmm.
I've got kind of a dual question. As far as sample rate and bit depth, what you guys track with, and then do you dither before it goes to mastering, or do you let the mastering guy do that? I don't know if you talked, I came a little late, if you talked about sample rates or bit depth or any of that stuff, just to get an idea of what the pros do.
Well, I mean, I generally believe in trying to, record everything at the highest resolution that you can, and the limitations might be with, your setup. As far as dithering personally, I always have someone do mastering for my project, so I do let them, make all the final steps, dithering included. I always send them high resolution files. But it seems that still, to me, most of what I see around is 24-bit 48K.
That's all I do.
Because really, everybody pretty much can move around with that configuration. But if you can step it up, you have the tools to do it, and you're going to stay in an environment where everything's going to open up fine with higher sample rates, and then I'd say for future archiving, that's kind of a thought again. If you can keep things at a higher resolution for the future, that's better. But so.
Pretty much you all concur with letting the mastering engineer do the dithering?
If you can.
If you can,
If you do it wrong.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks, fellas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and one
Yeah.
quick thing on the sample rate and stuff. It just if anybody does the home thing and it changes, that I deal with that a lot. And one thing, if you're a home studio user and you do stuff at home at say 96, because that's the highest you could do it at. What happens a lot with me, I have 16 tracks of drums you get from me. It's all working great in your system until if your system can't handle that many tracks. Mm-hmm. I'll do stuff at 96 for people, which is kind of a pain. I got to change my whole headphone routing, but they get them and like, man, everything's popping all over the place. Man, tracks are dropping out. So that that's. I've heard a lot of people say, "Wow, that's what it said," and I read this, or you should really go to the highest rate. Sometimes it really hurts you. I've heard people have projects. One guy came to me. He said, well, can you help out my project? And he recorded everything where he could not do it at 96. And everything, he rendered everything, and they were all pops over everything. So basically, I had to redo his stuff. So to stay at the 20, I do everything at 24/48 and then send it out to whatever people need as I export. It seems to work better that way.
Watch the word clock.
Right.
Yeah, word
It
clock
causes
too.
lots of problems.
Everybody get an Apogee Big Ben.
The blue light's solid.
Yeah.